I want you all to work on this problem right on the screen. Okay, so let's look at it. The borrower wants to borrow $130,000 at 7.5% for 30 years. The loan factor is $6.99 per thousand borrowed. The estimated annual taxes are $1,200, and the estimated annual insurance premium is $360. What is the monthly PITI payment? Don't worry about the book number. So let's see if we can work that out. Take a couple of moments and see what you can do with it. All right, so let's look at this problem here, okay? And if you didn't get it done, we're going to take it step by step. All right. The first thing we want to do is divide that loan factor. This is that same problem written down smaller. So we have $130,000 that we're going to borrow. So we're going to divide that by 1,000. It means we got 130 thousands. And we're going to multiply that by that 6.99 factor, which is up here. And it means we got $908.70 is our monthly principal and interest. Okay, just our principal and interest. So now what we're going to do is figure out our taxes and our insurance, right? So we have taxes that are $1,200. That gives us $100 a month. And we have insurance that gives us is $360 annually. So we divide it by 12, $30 a month. So we add our principal and interest. We add our $100 taxes. We add our $30 in insurance, and our PITI for the month, $1,038.70. $1,038.70. Okay, that's what we do. Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That is our monthly payment. Okay, that is our monthly payment. So we need to find that out. So that's what we did. Not too difficult, right? So how much interest over the life of the loan are we going to pay? If the monthly P&I is $498.75 on a 30-year, $75,500 loan, the total interest paid over the life of the loan is $104,050. So how did we get that? If we come down here, we got to figure out how many payments that is, right? $498.75 times 360 payments, $179,550. Okay, and we owe principal-wise $75,500. That means the rest, the balance, is interest, and that's the interest over the life of the loan. Okay, that's the interest over the life of the loan. One more time in the PowerPoints, because we're going to go to the math packet in a minute. If our monthly principal and interest payment is $498.75, and the loan amount of $75,500 at 7% interest, what's after the first month's payment? What's the new loan balance? Let's go through this slowly again. I'm going to take my loan balance. Right now it's $75,500 times my interest rate. That's going to give me my annual interest. But I'm at the first month's payment, so what do I need? I need 1/12 of that, right? Because I'm going to pay the whole thing. They're giving it to me annual. So if I do this, it's going to be annual interest of $52.85 divided by 12 months. So of my first payment, $440.42 is monthly interest. Monthly interest. So I'm paying $498.75. So if I do that, $498.75 minus the $440.42 monthly interest, $58.33 is my principal for the first month. Much like we did before, we subtracted that $58.33 from our beginning balance, $75,500, and we ended up with, if we wanted to pay off our mortgage at the second payment, we'd only have to pay $75,441.67. All right, and that's our loan balance after that, right? After our payment. So that's really what it is. All right, so far that was the easy part. Let's do some in real time. Let's do some in real time. Okay. So we talked about simple interest, all right? Let's look at the bottom of page 30 here on the interest over the life of the loan. Interest over the life of the loan. So question number one, a buyer has monthly principal and interest payments of $1,000. They financed $165,000 for 30 years at 6% interest. What's the total interest paid over the life of the loan? How much do we have to pay over the life of the loan? All right, so we're going to make 360 payments of $1,000. So if we do that, if we pay this thing out over 30 years, we're going to pay $360,000 over the life of the loan. My initial borrowing amount is $165,000. So 360 minus that $165,000 is going to be $195,000 in interest. Okay, so that's how we figure it out. All right, let's do number two here. Let's do number two. A buyer has monthly principal and interest payments of $895. They have financed $120,000 for 20 years at 6.5% interest. What's the total interest paid over the life of the loan? All right, so we're going to pay $895, but how many months? We're going to pay it for what? 20 years is what? 240, right? 240 months. So that's going to equal 214,800. All right. 214,800 minus what we borrowed. That's going to give us the interest on the rest of that loan, right? So over the time, we're going to pay $94,800 to borrow $120,000 in addition. Very quickly, why is it interest and not principal? I'm not understanding, Tyler. Or not both P and I. Well, because we can figure out what the total payment's going to be and then subtract out the interest. We can do that. I mean, if we wanted to, if we knew what the interest was going to be, but it's just simply to figure out, we know we're given what the principal is going to be. So the rest is interest. It's really as simple as it gets. Very quickly, let's do these first few questions. Number one, how much interest is paid in 1 year if the principal is $180,000 and an interest rate of 6%? So what we're going to do is we're looking at our principal, $180,000, that's what we're going to borrow, and we're going to multiply it by 6%. And that's going to be our interest for the first year, $10,800. Yes? Seems like everybody's got that one. That's pretty simple. All right, let's look at the second one while we're doing this. How much interest is paid in 1 year if the principal is $225,000 with an interest rate of 7%? How much interest are we paying for this one? So I take our principal of $225,000, multiply it by our rate of 7%. Now, in case you're confused, and I know that some of you understand this, but maybe somebody doesn't. The interest rate that they give us is always annualized. So it's always for the whole year. So don't try to figure that out monthly unless you're going to take that annual number and divide it by 12. That's the only way you can going to figure it out monthly, okay? So if I tell you that something is 5%, it's always for the year, or 3 or 10 or 15, whatever that is, it's always for the year. All right, and then you got to figure it out by either days or months or what have you. Okay. Okay, so let's look at that same question. How much interest is paid monthly if the principal is $225,000, which is the same year, with an interest rate of 7%? So this looks pretty good. How much of that is paid monthly? Right? 15,750, which is what we're going to pay annually. We are going to do what? We're going to divide it by 12. Yes? Seems fair? Divide it by 12. And that's going to be $13,1250. All right, so now how much is going to be paid daily? Now there's two ways you can do this. Obviously, you can take this one, the monthly one, and divide it by 30, or take the annual one and divide it by 360. I like to do the annual one and divide it by 360. 15,750 divided by 360, and that's going to give me $43.75 a day. Okay, pretty simple, right? Not too difficult, not too taxing. Let's look at number 5. A buyer is purchasing a new home and financing $270,000 at 7% interest. Closing is scheduled for November 20th. How much interest will the buyer have to pay at the closing? Welcome to interim interest. At the closing, the buyer is going to have to pay for the month. Okay, let's talk about interim interest here for a second. If I'm borrowing money, let's do a timeline. Okay, this is January, this is December, at the end of the year. All right, or December 30th. Let's assume that this is June, and this is the end of June, and this is July, and this is August. Bear with me. I know I'm not according to scale. That's fine. All right. I'm purchasing the house on the 15th of June. Now, remember we talked about taxes? The seller pays for the taxes from the beginning of the year through the 15th of June. That's going to be the seller is going to get a debit from 1/1 through 6/15 closing date. Right? Everybody agree with me? Okay. When we are the buyer, we have something else. It's something different. And it's the only time it happens for purposes of our class. I'm going to get a loan. Is the bank going? I'm going to pay, when I take over this house on 6/15, I'm not going to get a bill for 7/1. The seller's been getting a bill for the last month, for the month, right? 4/1. He keeps getting a bill backwards. So if the seller still owned this property, he would get a bill on 7/1. But because we're closing on 6/15, we're not going to get a bill from the mortgage company on 7/1. It's going to get paid off here today. Our first bill from the mortgage company is going to be 8/1, and it's going to cover the principal interest for July, not to the closing, just for the month of July. So we pay back 1 month of principal and interest. Well, does anybody know a bank who's kind enough to just let us off scot-free for 15 or 16 days of interest because, we're probably out of pocket a little bit? No, there is. They don't exist. That's the Brontosaurus thing. No, they're dinosaurs. All right, now, so that means what? At the closing, the attorney's going to have to collect some money from me, the buyer, for the amount of days left in the month. Well, if I'm closing on the 15th, I have to pay what's called interim interest, right? Interim interest. But I also have to pay from the day of closing, not the day after closing. On interim interest, the bank doesn't care who the seller is. Maybe the seller's going to pay another bank. But he's not going to pay your bill. You're borrowing the money from the day of closing. So if we're talking about interim interest, we want this 16 days here. That's what we got to pay. From the 6/15 to 6/30 in our particular case. All right. So that has to be collected at the closing so that we can keep going. 8/1 will get a bill, 9/1 will get a bill for August, right? And so on and so forth. The seller owns the day of closing except for interim interest. Interim interest belongs to the buyer. Okay. Interim interest belongs to the buyer from that day forward. All right. Does the seller bank charge them interest for that day too? Yes, believe it or not. If they have a mortgage, the seller pays on the day of closing too, but they could be ABC Bank and XYZ Bank, right? XYZ Bank gets it from the buyer from the day of closing. ABC Bank gets it from the seller from the day of closing. It doesn't, neither the train shall meet, right? They both go to different directions. Neither one is going to let them off the hook for the day of closing. So if the seller was paying it, it would be called accrued interest. I don't remember a question on accrued interest, but there are questions on interim interest. Okay. So if the seller's paying in the middle of the month, he's paying accrued interest from the beginning of the month. The seller's paying interim interest going forward. So number 5, the buyer is purchasing a new home and financing $270,000 at 7% interest. Closing is scheduled for November 20th. How much interest will the buyer have to pay at the closing? How much interest does the buyer have to pay at the closing? All right, so in this question, we'll kind of walk our way through this now. All right, so in this question, I have $270,000 at 7% interest. That's how much I'm financing, right? So I got 270 times 7%, okay? And that's going to give me $18,900 that I'm going to owe for the year. I'm going to take my $18,900 and figure out how much per day that is, divided by 360 days. All right. And that's going to be $52.52. Now, the closing is scheduled for November 20th. How many days do we have? We have what? 11 days, right? Exactly. Because you got to count the 20th, right? So 20, then 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 11 days. So we're going to take our 5250, right? And we're going to multiply that 5250, not 5252, times 11 days. And that is going to give us our number, which is $577 and 50 cents. That's interim interest, okay? That's interim interest. When I drew the timeline, I think I said that the interim interest was going to be, both parties are going to be, when they're paying interest, both the buyer and the seller. The seller is going to be responsible for the closing on the taxes and other things, right? Well, if they collect rent too, they get to keep the day of closing also. But that being said, the buyer is going to be on interim interest, okay? All right, do number 6. And number 6 is a little bit different. A little bit different. All right, so here's how number 6 works. If I am assuming somebody's mortgage, that means, remember our timeline before? Our timeline said that we were going to get a bill on 5/1, 6/1, 7/1, 8/1, right? We're going to get a bill paying backwards. Well, if I assume a mortgage on 6/15, I'm still going to get a bill on 7/1 because it's the same mortgage. So they're going to send the bill to the property. So I'm assuming it. So in this particular case, I'm going to look at it, and if we're closing on the 15th, the seller owes the first 15 days of interest of that month, and the buyer owns the second 15 days. Because the bill is still going to come in. We're not changing mortgage companies. We're not waiting a month. We're going to keep getting that. All right. We're going to keep getting that. So in this particular case, we are going to still get it. So let's go back to the problem at hand. Let's go back to the problem at hand. I'm going to assume a mortgage with a principal balance of $175,000 at 6%. We're closing November 14th. How much interest will be paid at the closing? It doesn't say who's paying it. It just says how much interest will be paid at the closing. All right. So in this particular case, we have to figure out a couple of things. All right. So how much per day are we paying? So $175,000 remaining times 0.06, all right, is going to be 10,500. And then we got 10,500 divided by 360 days. So how many days, how much per day? All right, is going to be 29.1666. All right, 29.166. All right, now that means that if we're closing on the 14th, the seller owes me for the first 14 days of the month because I'm just going to pay the whole bill when it comes in at the end of the month. I'm still getting a bill on a loan assumption. We're not getting a new mortgage. All right, so that's the distinction here. I'm assuming the seller's mortgage. So I got to keep the payments going. But the seller owes me for 14 days here. 29,166 times 14 days. $408.32. Seller debit, buyer credit. December 1st. If I was getting my own mortgage as the buyer, I would not get a bill on December 1st. I would get one on January 1st to cover December. But if I'm assuming a seller's mortgage, I'm picking up his payments right as they're going along here. We're not going to make any changes. But I'm not paying his whole month. I want the money he owes for the first part of that month. So that what we're doing here is on December 1st, I'm going to get a bill, much like the seller got a bill February, March, April, May, so on. I'm going to get one in December. It's going to be for the whole month of November. Did I own it the whole month of November? No. I want the seller's portion of that interest for that month. So therefore, I got to figure this out and then charge the seller. I'm going to get a bill on December 1st. I'm going to have to pay the whole thing, whatever that is. But I need it to closing. I need to collect some money here. That's what's happening. Let's look at this practice problem. I'll reduce it down so we try to get everything on this page here. Robin Smith bought a $150,000 home and applied for a 90% conventional loan at 9% with a 30-year term. The amortization factor is $8.05. Okay, so we've given you the base. You got to know where to put those things by now, right? All right, so we have a $150,000 home, and we're going to get a 90% loan at 9% for 30 years. And we have an amortization factor of $8.05 per thousand. What's Robin's monthly payment of principal and interest going to be? So principal and interest, right? How much were we going to borrow? So first thing we got to figure out is how much is our loan amount? 150,000 times 90%. 0.90. All right, so we have to get that loan amount, which is $135,000. And then we got to take that and divide it by 1,000. So we have 135 times our loan amount. Times our loan factor, our amortization factor, times 8.05. So our monthly principal and interest in this particular case is going to be 1080 times 805 equals 1086 and 75 cents. So how do we do that? We took our 150,000. We got a 90% loan, which means the bank's going to give us 135,000. 9% of the 30-year term means that for every 1,000 I borrowed, I'm going to have to pay $8.05 per month for principal and interest. So it's asking me for my monthly principal and interest payment. I'm going to take my 135,000s and multiply by my amortization factor. I'm going to get 1086.75. All right, number 2. How much of Robin's first payment will go to interest alone? How much of the first payment will go to interest alone? All right, so first payment. So we got to figure out something here. How much is our annual interest going to be on this $135,000 loan? So we have 135,000 times 9% interest for the year annualized, right? So that's going to be 12,150. And we're going to take that and we're going to divide it by 12 to get a month, right? How much per month? And our first month is going to be what? It's going to be 10,1250. That's our answer, 10,1250, which is C. Okay. Now, add on to that, letter C, number 3. What's going to be the balance of the loan after the first payment's made? How much is the balance of the loan after the first payment's made? Okay, so we know that our payment is going to be 1086.75 because that's what it says here, right? So we have 1086.75 minus, all right, 1012, which is our and 50 cents. That's our interest for the month. So our principal amount is going to be $74.25. So we're going to take the amount we borrowed, 130,000, minus our $74.25, and that's going to leave us with C, 134,925 cents. Everybody good with that? Now, the last question is, how much total interest will Robin pay over the life of the loan? How much are you going to pay over the life of the loan? So we're going to pay a certain amount. We're going to pay $1086.75. We're going to pay it 360 times, right? Because we have a mortgage loan for 360 months. So over the life of the loan, we're going to pay $391,230. That's a lot. $391,230, but I only borrowed what? I borrowed $135,000. How much am I paying on the interest of this loan? $256,230. That'll stop your heart, right? That's where you get the woo. That's a lot of money. That's exactly what that is, right? And that's what we figured out. It's all good. All right. Loan to value ratio, you guys know pretty much what that is, right? We're going to take our loan amount, divide it by our value, loan to value, and we're going to come up with a percentage. Or if we're going to get a percentage, we're going to multiply it by our value of our property, and we're going to get the loan amount. Not too difficult, pretty simple. All right. So you can figure those out. That is straightforward. All right. And then your discount points. Remember that your discount points, if I pay for 1 point, it's going to affect my interest by 1/8 of a point. So if I pay 8 points, it's going to affect my interest by 1 point, right? 1%, it's going to lower my interest. I'm going to pay 8% of the loan amount to lower my interest rate by 1%.
If you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend. For more real estate education content, please subscribe to the channel. From all of us at Seacoast Real Estate Academy, thank you for watching.